Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all here. The panel members, a great group of folks, asked if they could just introduce themselves to you, and then we're going to have them talk a little bit about what they do. Then I'm going to ask some questions, and then hopefully we'll leave it open for the last 10 minutes for you to ask some questions. So let's start right next to me and start with Kim.
Great. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kim Vu, and I am the Global Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Remitly, which is a global remittances company that supports the financial needs of immigrants around the world so that they can send money home to their families.
Hi. Good afternoon. I'm Cassandra Mitchell, Vice President and Corporate Responsibility Officer for KeyBank, covering Washington. KeyBank is a national bank headquartered in Cleveland, and we have, probably almost 20,000 employees now in 15 states. So happy to be here.
My name is Mark Horoszowski. I'm the co-founder and CEO of MovingWorlds. We partner up with companies to help them scale social impact programs by engaging their employees. And I'm based here in Seattle.
And I'm Rebekah Bastian. I'm Vice President of Community and Culture at Zillow, which is a very large real estate platform that hopefully you've all heard of. And I was also told I could give the shameless plug that I have a book coming out in 2 weeks called Blaze Your Own Trail.
And she had a really hard commute. I think it's one wall to this way or that way is where their offices are located. Okay. Steve, did you tell everybody who I was? Okay, so you know, I'm Herb Weisbaum. I'm the consumer reporter at KOMO Radio here in Seattle, and I've also been writing a weekly column for NBCnews.com for 14 years, which in the digital world is like 250 years. Steve asked me which panel I wanted to pick before I let you guys see what you do, and I picked this one because I have a big belief in corporate responsibility and taking care of our communities. I was on the board of directors of the Seattle Humane Society for a lot of years, and for 22 years ran their annual fundraiser, raised over $10 million that we could not have done without the generosity of many, many corporations in this area. And I'm now on the board of directors of Pasado Safe Haven, an animal sanctuary out here that's doing some great work. And again, we couldn't have our annual event, which I run, if it wasn't for the generosity and support in many ways from the corporate citizens in this community. So it's something that's very passionate to me. And I just wrote a little opening paragraph as a sort of a scene setter, and then we're going to let each one of the people, we'll start with you this time, Rebekah, tell us a little bit about what their company does. So I think we all know, and we take it for granted, that corporations exist to make money. Successful companies realize they're also part of the communities in which they live and where they do business. And it's really hard for a lot of companies to quantify the ROI on supporting, say, a local boys and girls club, or giving your employees paid time off to help with a local nonprofit. But I think we all know that focusing on values as well as making money is not only good for the bottom line, but it's good for the employees and it's good for the community, your home. And the idea of making a difference is changing. CSR, corporate social responsibility, is changing and expanding, and we're going to talk a great deal about that in the panel today. So let's get started. And Rebekah, why don't you tell a little bit about what's happening at Zillow?
Thank you. Yeah, so my team at Zillow, which we call the Community and Culture team, is really focused on a few big areas that fit together, with the baseline of it really being what we call equity and belonging. So that's focused on creating a workplace where all of our employees really have equitable opportunities to grow and thrive in their careers, and a sense of belonging, which is really feeling like they can be bringing their best selves to work, and that they're really seen and heard and valued for the unique perspectives that they bring. And from that, we look at what we call cultural engagement, which is really the ways that we create for our employees to be engaging with each other and also in our communities. And when we're thinking about that foundation of equity and belonging and getting our employees engaged, then we work on some really unique things that come out of that, really around how we can be applying an equity lens and applying socially inclusive design and business principles to the products that we're building and the business decisions that we're making, so that that engagement internally can really expand to how we're impacting the communities that we do business in.
So MovingWorlds is an organization that got its roots about a decade back. And actually, maybe for the sake of experiment, has anybody ever seen like the Spider-Man window washers? Has anybody ever noticed that before? Yeah. You like see this at your company, and then like everybody at your company is like looking outside, right? And then the Spider-Man goes, and people are still kind of wondering like, what am I doing here, right? Like, I mean, what am I like? How I'm doing hard, smart person work, but what what's the effect of that? Like, the window washer just brought joy to my life, right? But what am I doing? And that's where MovingWorlds started, right? Is with this question of, with people who have intelligence and work really hard, but they're seeking for a little more purpose in their work. They want to know that their skills are contributing to something bigger than themselves. That's where MovingWorlds started. And it started with the hypothesis that if those people can engage in skills-based service, especially in a way in partnership with their company, they can actually see how their skills, how their intelligence, and their company are really valuable citizens in their community and the world at large. So we operate a global platform that enables people to find skills-based projects around the world where they can go on short-term engagements. We offer an institute program that individuals can actually join on their own, where they can engage with a cohort of fellows from around the world as they explore their own personal career choices and growth in a way that will also make more impact. And then we partner up with companies, many local, Microsoft, Tableau, and others, who build leadership and professional development programs with the same belief that if people can see their intelligence and greater impact in action, that they can return into their companies and use that to foster innovation, be more inclusive and culturally competent leaders, and actually help engage more people in a more equitable way.
Very good.
Cassandra.
Well, I'm with KeyBank, a bank here in Washington.
It's not a dirty word. It's not a dirty word.
It's not.
It's not Wells Fargo. Okay, all right. Sorry.
He said it. I didn't. So KeyBank. So we are a national, or what we sometimes call a super regional bank. So we're in 15 states, as I mentioned earlier, across this footprint, across the United States. And we are committed to giving back and investing in our communities. And so what that looks like for us is basically partnering with nonprofits, ensuring that we are doing our part in helping with some of the challenges that we face here in this market. So an example of that would be affordable housing. Another example would be the lack of financial literacy and education. Another example would be homelessness, specifically homelessness within youth. Another example would be just doing what we can to make sure that people have access to financial services. And not only access, but the fact that the other piece is making sure that we have the products and services to meet their needs. So for us, it's really important not just to check a box like many banks do, but to really be intentional, thoughtful, impactful, transformational to those who need it most. And we have the pleasure of living in an environment here in Seattle where there's a lot of people who make great money, but there's a lot of people who don't. And so we want to make sure that we're serving the underbanked and the underserved. And my job is to find nonprofits who are doing their best work in serving those populations. And so for us, it's working with the YWCA, it's working with Mary's Place, it's working with El Centro de la Raza, it's working with Technology Access Fund, it's working with the Boys and Girls Club, and the list goes on and on. So I try to find those partners who are doing things that are innovative, different, but also really an expert in their field. Because as you know, we have a lot of nonprofits here, and a lot of them are doing the same thing. So we really look for those organizations who are doing things that are within their lane, but they're doing it well. So.
Thank you. Kim.
Yeah. Awesome. So I had mentioned that Remitly is a digital platform that provides financial solutions for immigrants to be able to send money home to their families across the globe. We actually started, just before I talk a little bit about what we do, but just give you a little bit of background about Remitly. How many of you actually have heard of Remitly? That's awesome. That's so great. So Remitly started in 2012 with the intent purpose of being able to provide a safe, secure, affordable solution for immigrants to be able to send money home digitally. Because up until that point, most of the solutions that were available to immigrants who have been underbanked and unbanked across the globe have been traditional solutions like the brick and mortar solutions of Western Union or MoneyGram that many of you are probably very familiar with. And my own family used that as I was growing up as well. And so what we really wanted to do was be able to provide that solution for immigrants to make it easier for them and make it safer for them to be able to send money home. And to date, we have now since grown our business to be able to serve more than 2 million immigrants around the globe, and transacting over $6 billion annually. And just to kind of give you a sense of what that looks like to date, with being able to send money from 12 different countries to 52 different recipient countries around the globe, that is less than 1% of the remittances business across the globe. So if you think about what was just transacted over the last year, it was over $600 billion that gets moved around the globe. And that just tells you so much about the need that is out there in the world in terms of where immigrants go to identify better opportunities for work, leaving their families behind and being able to have that tool and the financial resources to access historically traditional financial services and systems that they have not been able to access. So really social impact, and when we think about that mission-driven purpose of our work, it's built into what we do. Equity in terms of looking at financial systems is built into what we do on a daily basis. And so we're really committed to really putting the customer in the center of that, and then really building competencies for our employees within the organization who work on these problems to really understand what those core competencies are of really understanding the immigrant experience.
Before I start asking questions, I just would like Mark to share a personal story, the one we talked about backstage, about how sometimes organizations talk the talk and don't walk the walk, your own personal story.
Well, I'm a little nervous about putting anybody on.
Well, don't say the name of the group. You put it on your website, for crying out loud.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Nobody's on the web these days anymore.
Well, and see, now I'm biting my tongue a little bit because A, because of that, but B, because I was also putting a couple companies on blast backstage. Right. Okay. Can you give me a hint? Which one was this?
The one that's on your website that you sent us the link to about you were a volunteer and then.
Oh, well, okay, yeah. So without the names, hopefully this is the right one. It was a great company. I really enjoyed it, and that's a true statement. I say with some jest. That was a true statement. No, I grew up volunteering, and that for me was where I learned a lot. And I actually had a job offer out of my master's with this organization, and I think it was largely because of my volunteer experience. And I was traveling around the nation, speaking at conferences, training other volunteers. And then I was told that I couldn't go do that on the weekend because I had financial reports to audit. And that for me was kind of the breaking point. I saw Spider-Man literally, and I was like, I'm following that guy.
You can find the whole story on his website. Cassandra, I want to start with you. You're different from the other panelists because you are a highly regulated industry.
Yes.
And some of the things you have to do to keep the regulators happy.
Yes.
Do you believe, is your core that you believe, though, that you have to do this or you do more than regulation because you know it's just the right thing to do?
We do more. We do. It's more than checking a box for us. So as a financial institution, we're responsible for meeting the Community Reinvestment Act of 1977 regulations. And so what that means is, are we intentional in providing access to credit to low to moderate income communities, families and individuals? For us, it could easily be lending, investing, and service, and we check those 3 boxes. But it's really, I have to say honestly, and I'm not just saying it to be saying it, but it's part of our core. We look for people internally as far as our hiring practices who really value community service, who value diversity, equity, inclusion, who want to bring their authentic selves to work. And we want that to show up in the communities that not only we work, but also that we live. And so for us, we've gotten many accolades and 10 outstanding ratings from the OCC because of our CRA rating, which is the only financial institution that has. So I'll make that little plug. But it's really about going above and beyond and being intentional. So again, it's important for us to find the partners who are doing the great work, because we want to be a part of that great work too. It's important for us to not only pick an organization that we like because our senior executives are on the board. It's more than that. It's really identifying those community partners who are going above and beyond. And we could just do the bare minimum, but the OCC auditors, we're actually going, those in finance, CRA modernization is currently kind of under discussion, which means financial institutions who are used to just checking a box, I believe, will now be will be expected to do a lot more. Luckily for us, we've always done more, and we've always gone above and beyond. So when it comes to volunteerism, when it comes to our direct investments in the community, when it comes to locally, having and encouraging our employees to sit on boards, all of that is just part of our culture. And so one commitment that we made back in 2017 is a 5-year plan of $16.5 billion going towards the communities that we sit in. So $175 million towards philanthropic investments, $8 billion towards community development lending and investment financing, $3 billion to small business, and $5 billion towards mortgages. And so again, that's with a lens on serving low to moderate income communities. So we have products, for example, mortgage products, that may have a more lenient credit score, or may look at income that's not necessarily $150,000, but income that's $70,000. And that allows people in that category to qualify for a home. We have different products that allow individuals to get a checking account without having to pay a fee. So those are just a few examples of some of the work that we do that I believe makes us better than some of the other banks. But also just, I keep using the word intentional because that's the piece that really makes us different from the others. Okay. It's not just checking the box.
So for those of you who are from the Puget Sound area, know we have a major housing problem here, which is leading to a major homeless problem here, which is happening in many, many parts of the country right now. And Rebekah, I'd like you to talk about the housing connector that Zillow is running.
Yeah, we've been working on, so I mentioned that part of my team is really focused on, as we get our employees engaged, how can we be leveraging the skills they have to build on top of the products and the platforms that they've built to solve social issues around housing. And one thing that we've been working on for a little over a year now that is launching, actually we're going to be announcing it in the next few weeks, is we've been sitting on the Mayor's Innovation Advisory Council here in Seattle, and through that have been working on a program partnering with the Housing Connector, which is a local landlord liaison project. And so what they do is they provide both financial and social services support to landlords and property managers who want to modify their standard tenant screening criteria in order to help people get into rental housing that might not have otherwise been able to. And they work with service providers, so case managers and such from nonprofits that are helping those renters secure housing. So what we're doing on top of our rental platform on Zillow is building out the tech infrastructure to make all those connections, to manage the inventory of rental units belonging to those participating landlords and property managers, and facilitating the interface for the service providers to find the available housing and make all those connections in order to get people into housing. So it's been a really great experiment of being able to leverage our core competency, which is this rental marketplace, and partnering with the local organizations that are really experts in this space locally, and bringing that all together to solve a real substantial problem around the housing crisis that we are seeing here.
That's great. Well, Mark, when we were talking, preparing for this, it was explained to me that we're going more than just giving money these days. A lot of it has to do with the culture of the corporation. That is where a lot of the focus and attention is. And maybe you and Kim can talk a little bit about what that means and explain to our audience that it's not just about saying you can have a few days off to volunteer, we'll write a $1,000 check, what that whole cultural shift means, and why it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think there's two incredible examples of both Cassandra and Rebekah sitting on both sides of me of saying, how can we use our core product, our core technology, our people to actually create social good through the act of operations, right? And I think that's the growing shift, right? Last October, we saw the new Business Purpose Roundtable. If anybody's seen this, BlackRock has just announced, they're one of the biggest investment banks, right? They've just announced the biggest fund ever. If a company is not taking climate change seriously, you will not be able to bank through BlackRock. Goldman Sachs actually just said, if you don't have a woman on your board, you are not going public through us. right? So these are companies that are saying, hey, let's not create harm and then cover it up with some good. These are companies saying, hey, let's actually use our assets to create good and minimize the harm that we're doing in the process. I can give you an example. In one of the programs that we operate with Microsoft, it's called My Skills for Africa. It sponsors over 100 people every year to volunteer on 1 to 2 week projects to train new college grads, startups, educational institutions, and partners on how to embrace the cloud to be able to compete globally. And in one of those experiences, a volunteer went, pulled out his phone, was showing this new AI software that can do pictographics, could point here and you could put anybody in the lens and it would say oh, guess that person's age. Really good at white people, really bad for people of color. And so he came back and he was like, we're building racism into our AI and I want to fix it. And we're going to fix it or I leave. And he now is a part of a huge accessibility initiative. Not only has that given him new life, but actually it was his work that was instrumental to creating a multi-billion-dollar contract with the government of Canada. And it's because here was somebody saying, we need to fix our core problems, not propagate issues, and then that can actually create real business benefit, provided we're first serving our customers in the communities that we're working in.
Okay. Do you want to add to that?
Okay.
Oh, Kim's good. Okay.
Okay.
I want to play devil's advocate here for a second. Is it enough for a corporation these days to say, and anybody can answer this, or hopefully all of you will, to say, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give our workers time to do good things, and we're going to sponsor a diverse workplace, and we're going to do things like Lee said about BlackRock, and not the corporation putting some of its money or its wealth on the line. Is it enough to enable the workers and everybody else to do it, or do they still have to put their money where their mouth is, kind of thing? What's your take on that? Because I'm hearing a lot of the culture, which is great, but does that then do you as a board of directors say, well, then we don't have to give the grants and to do this stuff, because we're sort of doing it as part of our business? So I'd like to hear what each of you think about that.
Yeah, I'll kick it off. I think there's a combination of all of that, right? I think what we're seeing is a shift in general around corporate social responsibility. It's another cycle, it's another iteration of the process. If you think way back when to the start of many large industry, the folks who created those industries at the time said, hey, I made a lot of money in this industry to create jobs, to create infrastructure for the country, and I also know that the wealth that was created needs to be given back to build into infrastructure. And also, employees back then expected to work at their companies for 50 years and retire there. And then there was a shift to what we saw the next cycle of corporations was really looking at what's the shareholder benefit, right? And then the shift went all the way over to the other side around really this hyper focus on the shareholder. And we started to see shifts and changes in the way that employees were treated or customers were treated or the way community and consumers were treated. And then now we're seeing this new iteration and the shift and change, and all of this is, I think, really complex because you're seeing workforce shift at the same time. So you're seeing market shift, you're seeing community and customer expectation, you're seeing employee expectations change because of that generational shift that's happening in the workplace, where we're moving back to a hybrid version of what was 2 cycles ago, right? I'm simplifying this, we've gone through many cycles, right? But you're seeing the shift of what is now necessary in order to really be a truly socially responsible company. That it's not just an either or of anything, it's an and of all of those things to really be able to create a workplace that everybody does feel like they belong and that customers feel like they want to walk their dollars to your company. And if you don't do that, there's other options in a competitive market like this where your employees and your customers can go elsewhere.
I agree with that last statement, definitely. I mean, there's lots of banking options, right? You can have your allies, you can have your brick and mortars. And financial services is shifting. So for me, I feel like in order for us to keep the market share that we want and to grow the market share, people want to bank and have their services at places that are walking the talk. I was in HR for many years, and when I was doing recruiting, if I didn't believe in the company that I worked in or worked for, I couldn't recruit anyone else to come work there. that was just part of my core belief. I stay where I'm at, not because of the pay or the benefits, but because of the sense of community that we've been able to build. That's the only reason I'm there. And I've told senior leaders that same comment. It's like if these certain folks went away, or if we didn't have our ERGs, if we didn't have and really believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and let me take out diversity. If we didn't believe in equity and inclusion, I would not be at this company, and a lot of people wouldn't be there, and people wouldn't bank there either. And so I feel like, yes, it's a balance of walking the talk, having a board of directors who hold everybody accountable, and if it doesn't happen, you'll see it. We have companies who we all know, unfortunately, who have fallen from that grace, and so. So yeah, I think people have lots of choices, and in order to stay competitive, you have to walk the talk, and you have to be able to give back to your community.
Yeah, I think companies that operate like what Kim was saying in this kind of traditional mindset of saying, we get really good at making money, and then we kind of decide how to give some away. If they think about this act of integrating responsibility into all of their core operations. What's the way they hire? Where do they source their things from? Where do they distribute? If you look at it that way, then yes, they will lose equity. They will lose wealth. On the flip side, I think companies that are looking forward and saying, so the Sustainable Development Goals, right? United Nations targets for 2030. There's 17 of them. The economics in that state that there's a $12 trillion market opportunity for creating a circular economy. And so I think if companies say, instead of trying to protect business as normal and optimize for today, yeah, they're gonna lose out on wealth, but then eventually they're also gonna lose employees, right? They're gonna lose customers. I think companies that look forward and say, wow, the way of the future of the world, like that is one of the biggest opportunities. Actually, to quote Paul Pullman, the former CEO of Unilever, he said, "It is the biggest business opportunity that we have ever been facing as a global economy." And quite frankly, everybody is behind the 8 ball on moving progress there.
Yeah, 100%. And I would say, you asked if it's enough for employees to be engaged in doing this work without a company writing a check, and I would actually flip that around and say, is it okay or enough for a company to be writing a check, even a big check? I mean, even many big checks, if the employees aren't engaged in doing the work, which of course there is a cost to that as well. So a company that has their employees really engaged in doing work to create equitable outcomes through their business and products, there is a cost to the company there. But also what there is there's decision making and execution of the goals around equity and inclusion across the company, because what can happen, and this is kind of what Mark was mentioning about the do harm and then write a check to look good thing, like that's what can happen. If there's one part of the company that is writing a big check and then getting a nice announcement around that, like yes, the money is helpful to the organization, but it lets everyone else off the hook if it's not part of the DNA of the company. And the really cool thing about the employee engagement angle here, in addition to it being more sustainable and meaningful, is that it doesn't require that a company is big enough and profitable enough to be writing those big checks. Even startups, even smaller companies can build that into their mission and their operations and make an impact even before reaching profitability.
Yeah.
Final question before we open up to the audience here. How do you deal, you wouldn't appreciate because you're locally headquartered, and you would appreciate because you're not local, I mean, you're back in Kansas City, is that where you are? Cleveland. How do you deal with the globalization of industry now? And I'll give you an example. When I first came here in 1981, all 3 television stations were owned by local owners. We had the Bullitt family for King, which was philanthropic. We had Bonneville, the Mormon Church, which owned Cairo, where I started. We had the Fisher family, a local family that cared about the community, taking over running KOMO. Nowadays, all 3 stations, actually 4 with Fox, are all owned by big conglomerates. They're not here. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, they don't care about Seattle like the local owners used to care about Seattle. And it's much harder to try to do public service projects or good deeds or whatever because they're in Atlanta or Baltimore or wherever, LA, wherever they are, and they don't live where the problem is and what's going on. I don't know if there's an answer for this group, but I'm sure it must come up. How do you deal with the reality that you may be here trying to help this community, but the parentship is like way back somewhere else, and how you get them to do all these things you're talking about doing?
I think one of the things when I think about our work, because we are headquartered here, but we also have offices and a footprint in Manila, in Managua, in London, in Dublin, and in Krakow. And thinking about when we think about our employee engagement and the engagement locally, we really have to think about what's the global corporate narrative that we have that everyone across the organization shares when we think about equity and inclusion, but also the room for flexibility of what that local application looks like in the hands of the employees in those local markets. Because they know we have to take into account that there are social, political, and cultural dynamics and complexities that come into play, that there are things while in the United States are issues that are top of mind for us that may not be for another country, or the way that they prioritize may not be of the other country, and for the sake of not just thinking about it from the perspective of creating harmony for our employees on the ground, but thinking about what's also safe, right? Employee safety for our safety for our employees as they engage in their countries around social and political issues that matter to them. And so really relying on the leadership of our local teams to be able to guide that with us and for us on our behalf as it ties back to what it looks like for us as a global organization.
Cassandra, how do you deal with that?
We don't have much of a global presence, but
nationally.
Yeah, nationally. So the bottom line is, for us, Seattle's very different than Cleveland. Seattle's very different than Detroit. The list goes on. And so the good thing is our leaders, senior leaders, recognize that. And because of that, there are certain nuances, products that might shift or look a little different here to meet the needs of our clients here. A huge difference between Seattle and our area compared to some of the Midwest and East Coast companies is housing. You can go back there and find a house for $60,000. You can't find a parking lot here. So it's like those nuances when it comes to our product offerings, it makes a difference. And I would also add, with Cleveland being our headquarters, Seattle is a market that Cleveland weighs heavily. We have a huge piece in our success as a corporation, as an enterprise, this market. There's a lot of money here. So many times this market outplays the headquarters in many ways when it comes to profitability. And so there's a lot of things because of that that we're able to do.
Okay. Well, you have the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame there, and we get all the musicians, so it's sort of...
Right.
Okay. We only have 5 minutes left, so I just want to... Does anyone have a question? If you do, raise your hand or shout it out, and we'll try to get some questions if we can before we run out of time. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm curious. Earlier, one of the panelists mentioned, I think, Mark, it was you, you referenced the Business Roundtable's recent shift in 2019 about moving away from measuring corporation successes from a shareholder perspective to more of a stakeholder model. And definitely, I would say, personally, I'm really glad to see that. But I wonder, what goes through my mind is, do you potentially, by focusing on so many different items, right? Just very basically from a manager perspective, if I have a couple of metrics, it's simple, it's really elegant, right? And I think even a capitalist or Milton Friedman back in the day would argue that you have to be long run greedy, and that all of the multi-stakeholder stuff is implied, and you won't have that long-term profitability if you're not taking care of the multiple stakeholders. Do you, and for any of the panelists who are interested, do you worry that as we broaden that dashboard now to corporations to be focused on, that you'll have some dilution of focus, you'll not be as effective in ultimately meeting your corporate objectives?
Yeah, it's a great question. Do I worry about it, and would I worry about it if I was leading a corporation? Yeah, 100%. As a citizen of a planet that's facing a terrible climate crisis, I'm way more freaked out about that, right? And so I think what's changing is saying yes, this is getting harder, right? And it's not just because we're trying to be more responsible in a existing capitalistic system. If you take this out to some 0 point in the future, the global economy has to change. It has to become more circular, right? Mars is not going to sustain us all, right? And so I think where there's this evolution in thinking, and this is the challenge, is like, how do we get to that? And I don't have an elegant answer to it. What I would say is, and I'm biased here, employees within companies do, right? And I think these are actually the examples that we've been hearing all session, is that if the executives can start saying, okay, I can't just focus on employee or maximizing shareholder value, but rather we can create some things of, are employees excited to work in purpose-driven companies where they show up to work and can do their best work, right? Employees are going to be the ones that are going to start bringing these solutions forward, right? And they're going to make business sense, right? Because employees do care about the world, and they care about their communities, they care about their families.
Obviously, you didn't hear about Zillow Mars, but we'll get into that later. We have time for one more. Does anybody else have another question? Okay.
For those of you who have local leadership, is your investment in the community felt at the board level and a shared commitment at the board level, or is it leadership only, executive leadership only?
Great question. So we're still a privately held company. We're a venture-backed organization, but our investors, while they do hold a board seat, and ultimately, as we know, they're invested in their investment, right? But they're also really invested in having conversations with our leadership team around what we're doing in community. One of our most recent investors that we brought in was Generations, which was the fund was originally created by Al Gore to focus on ESG and climate change, and they're one of our larger lead investors. And so they're raising those conversations with our leadership team, and they're interested in our company because of the mission-driven social impact of what remittances does around the globe for global economies. And so a lot of the conversations we have are both on the global scale, but also locally in terms of being able to have conversations with them about what are our positions and stances on advocacy when it comes to different issues that come up, bills, legislation around immigrant rights and whatnot. So it definitely gives us the latitude for those conversations, and also I have direct KPIs that report directly up to the board every quarter.
60 seconds, anybody else?
We did a benchmark study with GlaxoSmithKline about what do the best companies to work for do in relation to others, and executive and board level support is one of the standouts. So it's super important, and I think it's a great question to be asking, but not enough have it, and I think Remitly is a great example of one that, KPIs to the board, like, that's incredible. But you're also seeing other interesting initiatives, like can employees get on the boards, and are they measuring other things beyond wealth?
All right. I want to thank Rebekah. I want to thank Mark, Cassandra, and Kim. I think it was an excellent panel. You guys can reach them on their websites. You can find me on consumerman.com if you want to keep up on consumer news, or write me a line. I have a link there, consumerman.com. And how about we give them a big round of applause? They did a great job.